بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي، ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، وانصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So we are going to read this article, and I'm thinking about the role of China in light of its alliance with Iran and other Muslim countries, and its increasing rhetoric about the South versus North, and standing up to American imperialism, etc. So it's important for us to understand the role of China in capitalism and distinguish clearly our position from Chinese and Russian positions, for example. So I'll read this article. It's an old article, but it will give us hopefully some theoretical clarification about the role of the relationship between China and capitalism. Start with the abstract. This paper assesses China's potential as global capitalism's systematic. I think it should be hegemon. That's the typo. Hegemon. So capitalism needs a state for sure. At the start, the companies, for example, East India Company, which conquered and colonized India, for example, Islamic India, it was a state as well as a capitalist enterprise. But as capitalism developed, it needed a state separate from these companies, and Britain became that state. And when Britain declined, America became that state. Because capitalism is global, so it needs a state which has global ambitions and a global reach. But now, as the US is declining, obviously it will take years, but it is obviously declining. So it needs a new hegemon. And can China be that hegemon? That's the question here. So this paper assesses China's potential as global capitalism's systematic hegemon replacing America. It outlines internal constraints that restrict China's capacity to serve as a global systematic hegemon in the foreseeable future, with special emphasis on the nature of the Chinese political system. And its capacity both for sustaining the level of economic growth that has occurred since the launch of the Four Modernizations program, 1978, and for articulating policies for the emergence of China as a global hegemon. Okay, so that's self-explanatory. Okay, Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Can China save capitalism? The credit crisis of 2007-2009 has revitalized debates about the durability of US global hegemony. Since, the, since at least the end of the Second World War, America has served as global capitalism's principal authoritative organizer. So what does that mean? It arms its armed force. So that's sort of an explanation of that, I guess. Its armed forces guarantee the continued expansion and survival of global capitalism. That's the first thing. Continued expansion and survival of global capitalist rule. So capitalism, just to start with, capitalism for us is both a life world and a system. On the one hand, and the same vein, it's also capitalism. So it's a civilization in the sense that I don't think this is a good one. But this capitalism system, so it needs an individuality, a capitalist individuality, a society, a capitalist society, and a state. And this system needs expansion as well as survival. And so the system is capitalist system has a rule, and those rules are, the capitalism is political system as well as economic system, and both has rules, and these rules needs defense against its rivals and its enemies, and that defense can, part of that defense is the military defense as well. So that's a rough explanation of what we how we understand capitalism. So since at least the end of the Second World War, America has served as a global global capitalism's principal authoritative organizer. Its armed forces guarantee the continued expansion and survival of global capitalist rule. That's why its armed forces need to be everywhere. That's one of the reasons. And there's a basic tension between America's role as a guardian of capitalism, and this tension is that America, on the one hand, it's a nation state. So it has national interests. On the other hand, America is a global state, as a capitalist state. Obviously, it's a nationalist capitalist state, but it's a global state of capitalism as well. And in that capacity, it looks after the interest of global capital, universal capital, or capitalist capital in general. And here it looks after the interests of American capital. And obviously there is always a tension between these two requirements. And that's the whole tension these days about American who, Trump say global against globalists. What they mean by globalists is this role. Obviously, America's role as a globalist state also benefits American state hugely. But these anti-globalist or nationalists think that America should purely act as a nationalist or nation state and just exploit capitalist and I shouldn't worry about global capital and these things. So that's a tension. There's always a tension, not just between globalists and anti-globalists, but within globalists, so-called. Because the globalists are also American nationalists. It's just a different version of nationalism, how you conceive your nation's interest. Okay. And that's obviously to the extent that America doesn't consistently play the role of the guardian state of the global capitalists, the global capitalist is weakened to that extent. So American norms, procedures, and transactions, American norms, procedures, and transaction forms increasingly serve as standards for structuring capitalist regulation regimes throughout the capitalist world. During much of the previous 6.5 decades, the buoyant American demand, American domestic demand, which has ensured relatively long upturns in the global business cycles, and the corresponding brevity and shallowness of global capitalist recessions. So during much of the previous 6.5 decades, it is buoyant American demand which has ensured a relatively long upturn in the global business cycle, and the corresponding brevity and shallowness of global capitalist recession. So it's not just the American armed forces, but also American capital, which ensures that the world capital is in good health. Should we just stop, or let's skip? Since at least mid-1970s, many authors have argued that America's ability to serve as global capitalism hegemonic power cannot last long. America now accounts for about 4% of the world's population. And this share will probably be halved by the end of the century. America's share of global GDP, and measured in purchasing power parity terms, has declined from 50% in the late 1940s to 21% today. Probably it has gone down even more. In the last, let's say, it was written, the article was written 15 years ago. So America's savage military assaults on poor, destitute countries have usually led to humiliating defeats and endemic chaos for America. North Korea, Cuba, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Mozambique, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, ad infinitum. And now in Gaza and Lebanon again. Most importantly, the buoyancy of American consumer demand exacerbates the fundamental structural weakness of American economy. reflected in its massive fiscal and current account deficits. So American demand, domestic demand, exacerbates, although it also contributes to the health of the global system, but it also increasingly exacerbates the structural weakness of American economy, which is its huge massive fiscal and current account deficits. Current account deficits and fiscal deficit. They're also known as twin deficits. The difference between these two. The current account deficit is basically a measure of countries' trade and financial transaction with the rest of the world. So it's basically the difference between what you import from the rest of the world and what you export to the rest of the world in terms of so the services and the trade, etc., which you provide to the rest of the world, and services and trade which you take from the rest of the world. So if deficit means that you are spending more than earning from the rest of the world. So you're buying more if you are buying more from the rest of the world and selling less than that, so then that difference is the deficit. If it is the reverse, then that is a surplus. So that's a current account deficit. The fiscal account deficit, on the other hand, or fiscal account deficit, on the other hand, or fiscal, no, not fiscal account, just fiscal deficit, on the other hand, I guess you can call it, it's just the term. So that's related to country's budget. So budgets, you have revenue, that's the earning of country, and then expenses or spending. So if your spending is more than your revenue, then you have fiscal deficit. Okay. And fiscal deficit and current account deficit, I mean, generally it's thought that the twin surpluses are better for economy, but it's not necessary. Fiscal deficit is not good or bad in itself. It depends on the structure of the economy and other things. Okay. So most importantly, the buoyancy of American consumer demand exacerbates the fundamental structural weakness of the American economy, because if you have more demand, then you're buying more from others, etc. Because of your heavy reliance financial sector, for example, then obviously the higher demand will increase the current account deficit, for example. So the most importantly, the buoyancy of American consumer demand exacerbates the fundamental structural weakness of the American economy, reflected in its massive fiscal and current account deficits. Therefore, the time may soon come when America will. Therefore, the time may soon come. That's these people who have been predicting the decline. Therefore, the time may soon come when America will have to relieve herself of the white man's burden. Reference to Kipling's famous phrase. Can this burden be shifted to yellow shoulders, that is China, and the South in general, I guess? The first part of this paper will present the view of those authors who believe that China can replace America, like America replaced Britain in the 20th century, as the new global capitalist hegemon. The second part will identify some internal obstacles which may prevent China from playing this role. The concluding section assesses these arguments. Okay, I think that's a good point to stop. And so the first part would be just a summary of the view of the authors who claim that China can replace America as a global capitalism's global hegemon. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك. صل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وزوجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم آمين.